Hey everybody, welcome back to the ECG channel. My name is Reid, and don't forget to go down to the description and download the PDF of today's EKG so that you can follow along and make your own notes. While you're down there, if you feel free to like and subscribe to this channel if you really enjoy these videos. So let's jump into this EKG. And so first step, as you kind of get used to by now, is I like to look at the forest and just get a general vibe of what's going on with this rhythm. And so the first thing I noticed, I maybe look down here at this V5 lead V5 rhythm strip, and I notice that I've got these narrow complex QRSs. They all say stay narrow, so that makes me think that this rhythm is coming from at least the AV node or higher. My intervals, though, seem to be long, and then maybe shorter, and so there's some type of irregularity. And when I take a look, something that I notice up front is that some of my beats have P waves and then QRSs, and then some of them have no P waves. I don't see a P wave there, and then I see P, no P, no P, and then I see P's and P's. So that makes me think that sometimes these beats are coming from our sinus node, sometimes these beats might not be. And so we need to kind of work through that and see what's going on. And so what you'll notice is that we'll have to adapt our approach to each EKG depending on how each rhythm presents. And so I do notice, though, that the beats that do have P waves, my P wave is upright in lead 1, is upright in AVF, and so the P waves that are occurring before my QRSs are sinus for those specific P waves. Remember, P wave is our atrial depolarization, and so if you look up here at my screen, if it's coming from my SA node and it's firing down and to the left, it's going to be up in AVF and up in 1, so that should be a sinus P wave. And from there, I see that my AV node seems to be working well on these beats. You can see my PR interval is less than, PR is less than 120, it is be less than 200 milliseconds. It's between 120 and 200 milliseconds, and so that is a normal PR interval. And like I said, we said our QRS is narrow, but my QRSs are upright in lead 1, they are upright in AVF, and so my QRS axis is down to the left, meaning that it is normal. So far, things seem to be beating in the right direction. We just now need to work out what are these funky beats that we identified on the lead strip, rhythm strip of our EKG here. And so something that I like to look for is, we said that there is no P wave. We'll start with this first beat. So we look at our QRS is narrow. It closely resembles the baseline QRSs that we are seeing. And like we said, there is no P wave here. And so this looks like a junctional escape beat. And why would I say that? Well, I see that we've got in our previous beat, the P wave that conducts to the QRS. And then we have a pause, and that pause is roughly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, a little over 7 big boxes. And so we know that the rate of those beats, if we take 300 and divide it by 7, that's a distance. That rate of that QRS to QRS is 42 beats per minute. And so that's slow. So really what we see here is we get a sinus node pause, right? Because our P wave hasn't occurred yet. We get a bit of a sinus pause, and then we get a junctional escape beat. I know it's coming from the AV junction because it's the same morphology of the QRS, but there's no P wave, so it's a junctional escape. It's not a premature junctional beat. It's actually doing exactly what it should do, and it waited a long time until it finally said, oh, okay, the sinus node is not going to be here, so I need to maybe beat. So that's that beat. Then we resume our normal P to QRS, P to QRS, and then we get to our next beat here, And we need to evaluate this one. It looks very similar, but there is just one difference. So we're going to evaluate this beat. And the big difference that you'll notice is, so one, we still have our narrow QRS. I still see no P waves. But what I do see after the QRS is I see this retrograde P wave. And I know that that's a retrograde P wave because if I look up in my inferior leads, you can see lead 2, which is this strip right above it. Right after the QRS, I get this sharp dip. And remember that sharp is associated with P's. And so you see that there's a superimposed retrograde P wave on top of the T wave. How do I know that that's a retrograde P wave? Well, lead 2, our retrograde P wave is negative. And so if you look at our EKG here, or our diagram of the heart, if I had a junctional beat that occurred from the AV node, and it sent depolarization down to the ventricles, well, if it went retrograde up the AV node, it would spread inferiorly to superiorly, which would give us a negative deflection as it's going away from lead 2. So that's how I know here that that's a retrograde P wave. Similarly to the previous beat, look how long this interval is when the sinus node doesn't beat for us. So we could call this as well a junctional escape beat. And then our next beat here we need to look at, and what you notice is that again I see no P waves, I see a narrow QRS, but I do not see a retrograde P wave. I actually see, if I look up to the beat superior to it, I actually see what looks like a normal sinus P wave that just came a little bit late. Because if you look at our normal P waves look like that. Compare that to this P wave, and I would say that that P wave just happened to come just a second after that junctional beat. So this is also a junctional escape. However, there is no retrograde P wave because the sinus P wave happened to occur just about at the same time. So what that looks like, if you look up here, what just occurred in that beat is somebody had a junctional beat that arose from roughly there at the junction, spread down to the ventricles and depolarized the ventricles, and just as it was sending retrograde signal back up, the sinus node fired and spread down just at the same time. The difference is that that sinus beat met that retrograde conduction and everything got blocked. And so that's what's occurring in this junctional escape beat that we just noticed. And then we have a resumption of our sinus node functioning and beating. Before we finish, we can take a quick scan of our QT intervals. I'm just going to eyeball our QT intervals and everything looks to be okay. Usually I'll do halfway between the R to R interval. And if my T wave ends, I say my QT is good. I don't see any ST elevation or depression or any T wave inversions that are scary in any way. And so what is this kind of put together this EKG? Well, we've got a sinus rhythm. We've got sinus pauses with junctional escape beats. Okay, so what are some important takeaways here? One, what are the P's doing in relationship to our funky beats? What does that mean? So understanding that P waves are atrial depolarization. And so atrial depolarization can occur from the sinus node, which would give us our characteristic positive P waves in leads 1, leads AVF, and leads 2. But P's that are forming retrograde are going to be negative in those leads. So you always want to determine when you have funky beats, if the P waves are before or after, are they retrograde or are they sinus? And that helps you understand what is the relationship of this atria to the ventricles. Are they attached, or are they conducting in synchrony, or are they both conducting sporadically because of escape or premature beats? So I hope this review helped you out. This is a complex one, but throw your questions in the comments, and I would love to answer them. Otherwise, have a great day.